look them up in the Pew Bibles, but I think you probably all know where Matthew and Luke are at. The first one is Matthew 28, verse 19. You will recognize this. It's a familiar verse, also known as the Great Commission. And it reads, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The second verse is out of Luke chapter 10, verse 2, and it also is another familiar verse to us. And it reads, "He told them, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the field.'" Our speaker this morning is Kathryn Pusey, and she should not be a stranger to any of us locally. She is the daughter of Bob and Wendy Pusey, who are here with her this morning. Kathryn graduated from Waco High School in 2012. She attended college at Iowa State University and graduated in 2016 with a degree in early childhood education. About 6 months after graduating, she moved to China, and she lived there for approximately 5 years until the pandemic hit a year ago, at which time she moved back home. So Kathryn, if any of that is not correct, I got it from your mom. Okay, at this time, we'll invite Kathryn to come up and share with us this morning.
I think my mom means it felt like 5 years because it was only 3, but to her it probably felt much longer. So I'll just quick pray and then I can get started once they get the PowerPoint up there. But guys, thank you for this time to share Sugar Creek, a church I've known my whole life. And I just ask that you'll just be able to bless our time together and as we share about China. In your name, amen. So the reason I chose those 2 verses are they're a big part of why I went to China. So I'll just share the brief version of that. But basically in college, I started going to Salt Company. And even my first year there was a conference about the nations. And part of that was just saying how, as a Christian, we're commanded to go and share the gospel with people. And then later on, kind of heard about how there's a lot of people who don't know about the gospel, and there's not enough workers. There's a lot of people who don't know about the gospel, but there's a lot of people who could go tell them. And so part of going to China was honestly a logical thing in that I felt, well, like I could go to China, and so it's needed there. And so I decided to go. So after my sophomore year, I went on a summer trip to China with Salt Company, which is a college ministry in Ames, Iowa. And then about a year after I graduated in 2017, I ended up moving to China and was there for 3 years, was planning on being there for at least 4, but then COVID happened and we all know how the last year has been for everyone. You can go to the next slide. So basically, when I went to China, part of why I was there was because Cornerstone Church, the church I was attending in college, that's where they had a team. And so there was already a group of people there that I was joining, all from Iowa, either from Cornerstone Church or Veritas Church in Iowa City. But the specific reasons for China is that it's not a Christian country at all. We all know lots about China, right? But the things related to Christianity, so China has 1.4 billion people, and to let that sink in, it's like 1 billion more people than we have in America, and yet the country is about the same size, and so the population is just really dense everywhere you go. But even though there's that many people, less than 7% are Christians, and of that, even most of those people, like, they don't know what the Bible is. The vast majority of people I've talked to in China have never seen a Bible. They might know who Jesus is from like a TV show or from an American movie, but they wouldn't be able to tell you like the basic Easter story that I think we would all know pretty well. And of the 56 different people groups within China, only about 20% have heard the gospel. And so within China, there's the Han Chinese, which is what you probably think of when you hear of a Chinese person. But then there's all these other small populations that have their individual like cultures and religions within China. So think kind of more like a tribal group, that kind of thing. And most of those people have never had anyone come and talk to them about Jesus before. And then a big focus of our team was university students. Kind of the Salt Company's frame mind is that if you can reach the next generation, then you can reach the world. And so we had the model of starting with university students because they're the people who are going to go out into the workforce next. And probably for anyone here who's graduated from high school, you notice that right after high school, things change a lot and you become a lot more independent and grow into kind of who you actually are. And so 1 in 5 university students in the whole world are in China because the population is so huge. So for the purpose of reaching university students, China is kind of the place to be. You can go forward. So I was specifically in Wuhan a year and a half ago. No one knew what Wuhan was, and suddenly it's maybe the most famous city in the world because of COVID. So I was actually in Wuhan when the pandemic happened. If you want to hear more about that adventure, I can meet with you later, but long story short, I was in Wuhan when COVID happened and left the city with a carry-on suitcase about 30 hours before they shut down the city. And if I hadn't left right when I did, I'd probably still be stuck there right now. So kind of the Lord's timing in leaving China. But Wuhan in itself, it's the largest university city in the world. And especially in China. So it's over 100 universities, and there's 1 million college students in that town. In that town, it's a massive city. There's about 12 to 13 million people there, so it's roughly about the same size as like New York City. And so you can imagine coming from here to Wuhan was a massive culture shock and change for me. Because suddenly you're going from your neighbors being cows to your neighbors being like 1,000 people in the same like apartment complex. So this is kind of a map of just one part of Wuhan. And all those green dots are different universities in the city. So that kind of gives you an idea of like just how close they are. And this is just like probably a third of the city shown in this image. But this is the area where I was located. So those 2 red dots are kind of the areas where my team was living. And those red dots are where we had 2 churches that we planted in Wuhan. To give you an idea of distance, the 2 red dots are only about 4 miles from each other. But on a like bus or public transportation, it would take you almost an hour to get from one dot to the other dot. If you're in a car, it would still take probably 20 minutes just because of the mass amount of traffic in Wuhan at that time. So I spent most of my time in between those 2 red dots and have visited a lot of those green dots. We spent most of our time working on about 5 of those universities that were bigger because they have a couple universities that are like 100,000 students. The Harvard of China is in Wuhan. So we were on that campus quite a bit as it's a very influential place in China right now. And then I actually was working at one of those universities last year before I came back. So you can go to the next page. So I'll talk a little bit more about what I was doing in China, but first I figured you might want to know who I was with. So these are the people on our team. This photo was actually just taken a couple weeks ago. We ran outside in the cold, threw our masks off, and took a quick shot when it was like -15 outside. So our whole team are people that were either students at Iowa State University or University of Iowa. We're all between like the ages of like 32 and 22. So there's kind of a big age range there. There is one baby on our team, but she's not in the photo. And so some of these people have been on the team the same amount of time as me, like 3 to 5 years, and others had only been in China for about 6 months before we left. So right now, we've all still been continuing to do ministry in China via Zoom. So I've had a lot of early morning, late night Zoom calls a couple times a week. And then are also doing some other things working for the international ministries in Ames, Iowa, and Iowa City. You can go to whatever's next. So this is kind of a picture of where I was living. This is Wuhan. This is actually the view from my apartment. The apartment complex I lived in was in between two universities that both probably had between 30 and 40,000 students on them. And so it was a really great location, and the view was beautiful. But it gives you an idea. You can see all those skyscrapers on the other side of that lake, and that's kind of what it looked like in any direction you would turn in, was just skyscrapers everywhere. And the university that I worked at as an English teacher was about a 20-minute walk from where this picture was, and that was really great because I was actually able to like work with students and then be able to use that as a place to talk to them about God. You can switch, yeah. So this is a picture of my students. I'm in the way back corner. You probably can't really tell. But so last year, after I'd been living in China for 2 years, I started teaching English. The 2 years before that, I was learning Chinese at one of the universities with a tutor. But this past last year and this year too, online, I've been teaching Chinese students like these English. And so while we were in China, this was a really cool opportunity to be able to meet with 7 classes of 30 students each. You can do that math, that was a lot of students. And then from that, be able to actually invite them into my home to celebrate Christmas, or we would teach them how to bake cookies. And from those have really natural conversations and get to know each other better. And as a teacher, it was kind of an interesting mentor dynamic, as I'm a couple years older than all of these students now. And it was a really cool way for them to get to hear about the gospel. Our team was also at that same time either going on campus as a student, studying Chinese, or there are a couple other teachers, and we were all trying to just meet students and build relationships with them in that way. I'll have some other pictures of that later. So this is a quick video to give you a better idea of what the city looks like. There's sound with it, but my brother actually made this when he visited me last year, and it kind of gives you an idea of what Wuhan looks like. I guess I can narrate since the music's not playing. This is my campus that I studied at and taught at. And so you can just see there's tons and tons of students everywhere. This would be during their lunch hour when they're all walking to the different cafeterias on campus. So that's kind of a glimpse into what Wuhan looks like. I show that partially just because all we hear about Wuhan recently is just about COVID, which is understandable. But it's also a really beautiful city that no one would ever go there to travel, but it's really cool. And so my brother made that. So now that I've talked just a little bit of that background, I'll talk a little bit more about like our actual ministry and things I was doing for the rest of the time. So I talked about this briefly, but our organization overseas has the goal of trying to reach the whole country, but we start that small by just trying to reach each university. So we had the vision of trying to have a church near all of those universities in Wuhan. Maybe not one at each university because that would be a lot, but trying to have something near each one. And for those who are not familiar, China is a pretty closed country when it comes to Christianity. And so you can't have a church building like this. Anything that we did was always like in apartment. So when I say church, I mean more like even a Bible study, meeting in like a house, and it'd be about like 10 to 15 people. But then the actual time would look really similar to where we would have worship, someone teaching, and like a time of discussion afterwards. And that would all be in Chinese. Because we want that, even though we're the ones planning the church, we wanted it to be something that if we ever had to leave or flee the country because of COVID, they would be able to keep going without us. And thankfully, that's what has happened. One of the churches that we planted is actually fully independent now. And they meet every single week in their apartment still. And it's been really encouraging to see that. But our goal within that is through reaching students in the universities, we would then be able to reach people within the city of Wuhan. And through that, since a lot of those university students don't end up staying in Wuhan, but go back to where they grew up, that then they would be able to share the gospel with the people in their hometowns that maybe we wouldn't be able to communicate with. Especially because most university students speak pretty fluent English, but their parents probably don't speak English very well. And so the chances of me being able to share like about Jesus very well are pretty slim, but their kids could do a fantastic job of that. And so that's kind of the pattern that we are starting to grow and have been growing. So right now we have planted 2 churches in Wuhan. And from those, there's now people who are students in those churches and people who are just living and working in Wuhan. And from that, they've been able to go out and reach and share the gospel with people from their hometowns. So we're kind of seeing this idea happen. And then from there to the world, if they leave China, you know. So you can go to whatever's next. So part of how we were specifically doing that, a big part of what we did was learn Chinese. So for my first 2 years, I was spending about 20 hours a week taking Chinese classes. It felt like I was in college again and getting a second degree almost, because we really wanted to be able to share and talk with our friends in Chinese. It's a really great way to even just show love to people is if you can talk to them in their own language. Chinese is really, really hard. It's one of the hardest languages to learn in the world, like up there with English. And so we decided that we wanted to commit the time to try to learn that to be able to better reach people. Because there are many students in China who speak English, but not everyone. And you're just going to understand something better if you hear it in your own language. And from that, be able to share the gospel with students that we meet. We'd meet people by inviting them to our house. We go awkwardly sit next to someone at a cafeteria or at a restaurant and say hello. One time I picked up a bag of chips at a grocery store and asked a student if they could tell me what it was. Just things like that to try to build friendships. Because China's a closed country, we never like went on campus and like passed out flyers or like those different Jesus flyers that you see. Everything we did was very relational and trying to build close friendships with the people we were meeting. And from that, after people would get to know us and maybe come to like a Bible study that we were part of and becoming believers, we would start to disciple them one-on-one. And from there, plant a church and invite them to come to that church because most people don't know of a church to go to in China because everything is very under the radar. And from that, start to have a community of believers. So you can go. So this is kind of an example of this. This is a party that we had at our house. I think this might have been like a Christmas party or like a welcome back to school party. And this was just like a great way to meet people. We would invite our friends and tell them they can invite their friends. And then suddenly there were 50 people in my apartment. And my living room is, I don't know how we fit 50 people in that space because it is smaller than this space up here. But somehow it worked. And from that group, a lot of those people came to want to come into our Bible studies and get to know us better. And part of that is also just Chinese people don't know a lot about the Bible, but they're college students and they love to learn. And so they wanted to come and just learn about something new. But then once they saw just the friendships and fun that we had, they like wanted to keep coming. You can go over. So this is just some more examples of things we would do. We would go out for food a lot with our friends. Food is really cheap in China, thankfully. So we would go out to eat like every single day. And just go on walks around the park. Girls like to go shopping a lot, so we do that. The guys would play basketball 24/7 and to meet people. And so it was just a really fun way to do ministry that is actually really tangible because you're just building friendships with people you actually want to hang out with in the future. You can keep going. So from that, then we were able to start this church called Spring of Living Waters. It's from Revelation 21:5, where it just says like the gospel is like a spring of living waters that gives you life. And so these are all people that had become believers in the past like 3 years of us meeting them. And so we would do, this is like a Thanksgiving meal that we had with them. To give you a story, this girl in front, the guy behind her, he actually became a believer in America through an international ministry. And then as he was going back to China, one of the guys that he worked with knew of a connection to us. And so they were able to connect him to our church in China so that he was able to have a family to go back to because he didn't know any other believers in China at that time. So it's just really cool to be able to get to meet these different people. The girl on the far left is a friend that we had met through another friend at a university. And after like 2 years of hanging out with us, she decided that she wanted to give her life to Christ. And I got him baptized just shortly before that picture was taken. And so these were just like our first few meetings together as a church. So you can see we're pretty small. I grew up in a small church, so it didn't feel that unfamiliar, honestly. But yeah, just a really cool group to know that like they wanted to keep coming every week. So you can keep going. So specifically, those two girls on the left are Lillian and Wallace are their names, and they're two girls that I would meet up with every week outside of church, and we would do like a Bible study together. And they were both believers already at that point, but just really sweet people. My parents actually got to meet Lillian. She went to Beijing with us last year, and yeah, has just become like a really close friendship in those times. And this girl, Amy, who you can't really see her face because the picture is dark, she's a girl that we met on campus through like an English corner. And after about a year of meeting up with her regularly, she decided to become a Christian, actually got baptized on our porch in a little kiddie swimming pool because that's what we had. And so it's just cool to see how her life had suddenly changed from this point of not knowing anything about Jesus to wanting to get baptized and start to like live her life in a different way. And then, the other way. Yeah, so this is what our church grew into. So from that first picture of like 9 people, in this photo we probably have almost 20. And this was taken right before we left Wuhan. It was like our Christmas party where we had some homemade Chinese food that was really, really good. But in those 2 years of starting that church, just to see how it like was multiplying, and grew into this big, like honestly, just family of people who most of these people didn't know each other before coming to this church. And now they have actually become really close friends. They all go to about, I think, 5 different universities in that area. Some of them are from those smaller people groups that I talked about earlier. And so they'll actually be able to like go home and share the gospel then with their like villages, because they grew up not in the city, but in really like towns kind of more like Wayland. And so it's just really cool to see how these people are now taking the Bible to other places where we maybe couldn't go. So that's a lot of what I was doing. This is one of the last photos I think I took before, or that we took before we had to leave Wuhan. So I think if you go forward, now church looks like this. So for the past year, we've been doing church on Zoom. So Wuhan locked down. All of our friends were actually not in Wuhan at the time because it was during the winter break. And so they had all gone home, and none of them were actually from Wuhan. And so they weren't in Wuhan when the lockdown happened. They were with families. I wasn't in Wuhan either. But we have been meeting on Zoom basically every Saturday night, our time, Sunday morning, China time, to have church together with them. And so this is a group, this is one of the first times they were actually all back together. China opened, they canceled the lockdown back at this past summer, and then they all came back to Wuhan in September for the new school year. And so they have been meeting together. The group is smaller now. There's about 6 people coming regularly. That's mainly just because the other people graduated and have gone on to do different things. My friend Lillian, for example, she moved to a city called Shenzhen, and she's found another church there that she's now a part of. But these 6 people have been coming faithfully every week on Zoom, and I honestly don't know why, because I don't think I would do it, honestly. They're really committed, and it's really cool to just see that they love each other that much. They don't really have, all of their other friends are not Christians. This is the Christian community that they know and that they have. Most of them, their families aren't Christians. They didn't grow up in a Christian home. They never heard the gospel until they came to college. So we've been meeting on Zoom with them this past year. In another month or two, a couple more of them are graduating and moving. And then I think because it doesn't look like China's borders are closed right now, I can't go back, the rest of that church will probably actually consolidate with another church that our team has planted in the past that's been fully independent for the past year. So you can keep going. So this past year, while I've been here, I've still been doing a lot of international ministry, partially on Zoom with that group in that photo, but then also in Iowa City, I've been spending a lot of my time with, they call it IFC, is the international student ministry that the church I've been going to has. And so I'm kind of working part-time for them right now. And so these 2 girls, 3 of them are American, then the girls next to me are Eva and Amy, and they're Chinese students at the U of I that I met at Target when I heard them speaking Chinese. And my friend and I awkwardly went up to them. We're like, "Are you from China? We want to speak Chinese with you." Because I'm losing a lot of the language I've learned. So we've been hanging out with them every other week or so. This is at the Coral Ridge Mall, and we went ice skating, and I remembered that I don't know how to ice skate. So I just stood there most of the time. But it's been really cool to just see how even not in China, we're still able to go to the end of the nations. There's a ton of international community right in Iowa City, a couple thousand people at least that are at the U of I are working in that area. So you can go forward. So before I close, because our time is short, I could talk for hours. Some things you could be praying about in the future are just praying for the church in China right now. I mentioned a little bit before how it's a closed country, and that's becoming more true recently. They're starting to try to find those smaller churches and shut them down. We have one guy who's a pastor, and so like it's potential that like he could go to prison if they found out that he was leading a group in a church, because it's illegal. It's legal to be a Christian in China, but it's illegal to talk about being a Christian or like to share the gospel. And so we've seen a lot more of that happening with the churches in China. And you've maybe heard there's like a lot of persecution happening among like Muslim people in Western China right now. And so if you haven't, I can tell you more about that later. But because of that, there's fear that that will start happening to Christians in China as well, where they're being taken away from their families and being put in like essentially a prison camp that looks a little too similar to World War II. You can also be just praying for our team in decisions for the future. So right now, the reason we're not in China is because after we left, they canceled all Americans' visas. And you can currently only enter the country if you like are a government official or like certain, like if you own a certain type of business in China. And so we're actually not allowed to go back into the country right now. And so we're just trying to figure out what that means for what we've been doing, because we can only wait that out so long. And so our team has been praying about potentially going to Taiwan to continue this idea of wanting to share with students in a place where they aren't going to hear the gospel as much. And part of the reason for Taiwan is that they speak Chinese there, which is a language that probably about half of us are like at least conversationally fluent in. And so it would be a bummer to go somewhere else and learn a new language. But also because Taiwan is also a place where just people haven't heard about Jesus. And Taiwan is like an island off of China, south of Japan, if you don't know. And then you can be praying for summer opportunities in Thailand. So Cornerstone Church actually just sent a new team of people to Bangkok about 2 months ago, because Thailand is now allowing foreigners into the country. And so with that, they want to send summer teams to do like a 2-month mission trip into Thailand. And they've asked the people on my team if we would want to go with them and lead those teams. So I'm actually planning on going to Bangkok for the months of May and June to help with that. So you can just be praying that while we're there, we're able to meet people who want to hear about Jesus. It's a pretty Buddhist country. And yeah, people are just pretty close to Christianity there. And then from that, we'd be able to meet people who would want to become believers and be able to introduce them to the long-term missionaries that are there currently. With all this, I also have an email list out there that you can sign up for, where I send out emails like every couple months with just like updates on the things I'm doing, and have other prayer requests. So if you want, you can sign up for that. I think I had a video somewhere, but yeah, it would look like that. So this is a video about just like different baptisms that happen in China. And this is how I'll end, just because I think it's really cool to see these people, who hadn't heard the gospel being baptized. You'll see they're all in like kiddie pools and stuff because they're in apartments. But after church, if you want to talk to me more or meet up, I'd love to do that, because there's obviously many more things I could share. Yeah, so there's many more people than just in that video that I've seen like come to know Jesus in Wuhan. And yeah, like in last year, in the span of 6 months, I saw 5 or 6 people become Christians and then want to get baptized. So it's just a really cool opportunity. That's all the time I have, really. But I would love, if you want to sign up for those updates, feel free. Or if any of you, I'll be in the area for a while, or I live in Iowa City. And so if anyone ever wants to meet up and hear more, I'd love to do that. But I can pray quick, and I don't know what's next. Guys, thank you for this time together and for the work you're doing in China. I just ask that you would allow the people at those 2 churches there to just continue to be able to meet, and that they will be able to spread your name across the country. And I just ask that you would even continue your work here in Wayland. There's people here too that don't know who you are, and that we would be able to go out and share with them your name. Amen.